All right. Guess I am live now. Greetings, everyone. All right, today we're going to talk about lapsarianism, infra versus supralapsarianism, and why your lapsarianism matters. Okay? You know, you may have heard, and some of you may have be more familiar with this terminology, infralapsarianism and supralapsarianism. And what's the big deal, you know? And sometimes even theologians and Bible teachers sort of make fun of these terms and use them as sort of way to intimidate seminary students or just regular church parishioners that, boy, we know some lofty expressions. And people sometimes present this matter, this debate between infra versus supra, as something scholastic, ivory tower-like. This is for academicians, it's this dusty thing, and you shouldn't be concerned with this thing. Nobody knows exactly. Okay, let me first of all give the definition. Very short. By the way, this is not going to be academic by no means. You know, I'm not I'm a theologian of sorts, but I'm not by any means a ivory tower, you know, lofty doctor or anything of the sort. So, but I'll give you the brief definition. By the way, Kevin DeYoung, I'm borrowing, I'm relying upon some helpful materials that I've located on the internet in terms of definitions. And Kevin DeYoung, he was a very middle of the road, mainstream, sort of very moderate Calvinist, popular theologian, wrote a piece on that, a primer on infra versus supra on their Together for the Gospel, I guess, the Gospel Coalition. That's the site, and I'm kind of relying upon his definitions. Okay, so supra versus infralapsarianism. What does this mean? Okay, well, there are a couple of terms that you need to know. Well, supra. This has to do with Latin. Supra means above or before, and infra means below or after. Okay. Lapsus or lapsum, Latin lapsum means you have in English lapse, which refers to the fall, okay? So the issue is, in God's eternal decrees, or rather one comprehensive decree, which took place before time began. We're talking about eternity past, okay? This is not a temporal thing. This is something that took place, as it were, in the mind of God before anything came into being, okay? So, and infra and supra refer specifically to the logical, not temporal. Watch this, sometimes people get confused. You know, some people wrongly assume that infralapsarian position means that God had to actually wait till the fall occurred in order to, now they all fell, I gotta elect some unto salvation. This is a very crude and wrong presentation of infralapsarianism. This is not a temporal, this is a logical sort of order. But again, even here you have limitations because in God's simplicity and His immense divinity, comprehensiveness, His thought embraces from the beginning the very end. So there's no succession even in the, but still theologians, let me proceed. Infra and supralapsarianisms specifically refer to the logical order of decrees as regards predestination in reference to the fall of man. Okay? So the infralapsarian, or after lapses, after the fall position, views the logical order of electing some unto salvation and foreordaining others to eternal damnation as occurring at the backdrop of the fall, as though it had already taken place. Again, this is in the mind of God before anything came into existence, okay? This is not the historical development. This is just the eternity past that we're talking about, okay? This is the infra. So the election of some man unto salvation logically follows or after infra lapses, the fall of humankind, okay? Supralapsarianism, which is above or before, views the election or predestination until salvation and foreordination to damnation as occurring before a decree to create and to permit or ordain the fall. So in the former scheme and the infra scheme, people are viewed as elected as already considered sinful, so that God elects some of men who are viewed already as fallen in Adam. Whereas in supraposition, men are elected as creatable and fallible beings, but not as fallen in Adam. Okay? You'll say, well, what's the big deal? It still sounds like an ivory tower theological scholastic distinction. Who cares about it? You know, it's kind of high-minded Calvinist. What does it have to do with the rest of us mortals? Okay? Let me explain why even I took to talk about this issue. I'm not going to settle that. I'm not as naive as but in my view, it does have connection to the gospel of the grace of God. So your lapsarian position does matter. And here's why. Okay? Again, we're talking, we'll say, you might say, who are we to talk about what might have taken place in the mind of the Almighty? Who are we, puny creatures? Well, we do have God's revelation. And repeatedly, Scripture talks about us being predestinated in Him before the foundation of the world, and that the election takes place in the eternal mind of God before anything came into existence. So we do have some sort of predestinating doctrine in Scripture, okay? But still, it is kind of, does it matter whether it occurs logically before the decree to permit the fall or after the decree to permit the fall? All right, here's how I view it. In the infra position, and by the way, and Kevin DeYoung reflects that in his little primer, that the majority Reformed and Reformed Baptist position is infra. Most people who call themselves Calvinists or Sovereign Grace people kind of tend to be infralapsarian, and most even systematic theology books have been written from the infra position. The supra is kind of a minority view, but as we know, the truth is not settled by the majority vote, by the multitude. It is settled by an independent standard, which is God's holy word. Why is it important, and what makes it evangelical in essence, this question about infra and supra? Okay. In the infra position, in this logical order, Christ is not the first thought in the mind of God. And this is very important. Herman Hoeksema, in his Reformed Dogmatics, points that out, that when you compare infra and suprapositions, the infra order appears to us very logical and easily understood, because that it's how it actually developed. We do know that first God created the heaven and the earth, and then the fall takes place after everything is created. And then we get the first proto-evangel, or the first gospel promise. I believe it's Genesis 3:15, about the seed of the woman who would crush the head of the serpent. But it's kind of at the backdrop. So it kind of, this infra position appears to us very logical, and it kind of reflects how it actually developed in time. But Hoeksema points out that the historical development actually suggests that in the plan it was the reverse. And he uses this example. If, for example, if I think of a house, I think of a house, I want a house for myself and for my family. So first is this beatific, if you will, this vision of the house with me and a happy family. Then I think of, well, how do I actually implement that? And I think of the house, its dimensions, and its locations, and how it's going to be, and everything else. And then, well, I get to the very first steps too, but kind of I'm thinking backwards. Yeah, you got to dig up the pit and lay the foundation. But when you actually implement that plan, you first dig out this hole and you lay the foundation. But the foundation is not the first your thought. The first thought is the house and a happy family living therein. Okay, we get that. Now, where the supra and infra become a gospel issue is this. We know from the Bible that Christ is Alpha and Omega, the first and the last, beginning and the end. There cannot be anything prior to Him. Well, you'll say, well, the eternal Son of God is always with God, is also God. Okay, we understand, but what's wrong with this triune eternal God decreeing first to create everything, then to permit or ordain the fall, and then at the backdrop? But listen, the Bible also talks about the Son as lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So it's not just the Son, He is viewed as Christ slain from the foundation of the world. And we also know, for instance, from the book of Ephesians chapter 1 and elsewhere in Paul, that the election took place in Him. And since He is Alpha and Omega, it stands to reason that everything was conceived as taking place, especially our salvation, our redemption, our creation, and our fall, in Him, i.e. in Christ. He is the fountainhead. He is the first in this election. All things were created by Him and for Him and through Him. And if He is this Alpha and Omega, if in the beginning, in Arche, which is Christ, He is this Arche, if He is the beginning, then God created us in Him, and He ordained our fall in Him. We fell upon this rock of ages. Who then would become the rock of our salvation? Hence, the supralapsarian order of decrees has the evangelical ring to it. It's not just the, oh boy, who cares? It's just a scholastic distinction. I used to think that way too, before the Lord began to really teach me from His Word, that it does have evangelical references. Also, and Herman Hoeksema points that out very well, infralapsarians customarily refer you to Romans 9, to the vessels of mercy, and from that they infer, wow, if vessels of mercy presuppose the need to have mercy upon them, hence the fall, hence their election as vessels of mercy already considered guilty in Adam. That's the typical infralapsarian thinking. But Hoeksema, on the other hand, points out that when Paul, in dealing with his invisible interlocutors, when he says, well, who can resist his will? How can he still find fault? Remember that let me, I have it here, the quote, that Paul does not say, look, who are you, or sinner? Does not have God the right to consign us all to hell since we all fell in Adam? It would have been just of him. But Paul says nothing of the sort. So when he is confronted with this accusation, why does he still find fault? Who can resist his will? By the way, to any of you who happen to be Armenian who are watching this video, this is, if Paul was Armenian, as you are, there would have been no question like that. And he would have said, look, it all depends on the foreseen faith of yours and your evangelical obedience and so forth. So when this objector, when he says, thou wilt say then unto me, why doth he yet find fault? Who hath resisted his will? Paul is a full-blown 5, 6, 7-point Calvinist in a very absolute sense. But see how he responds to that. He says, nay, but, O man, who art thou that repliest against God? He's not talking about your sin. He's telling, who are you, man? Who are you? Shall the thing formed say to him that formed it, why hast thou made me thus? Have not the power of the clay of the same lump to make one vessel unto honor and another unto dishonor? So he's not even talking about sin. He's talking about, look, who are you? You're just a creature. And God, being the divine power, He has all the right out of the same lump of clay, which is Adam pre-fall, not Adam as fallen. Remember, Adam was formed out of the dust of the earth. Dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return. He is just a dust. He said, look, God has all the right to do as He pleases. And this is Paul's essential argument. He's not even saying, look, we're already guilty. We're the mass of sinners. He would have been just to leave us all in our common misery, but He elected someone to salvation. He's not talking about that. And this is a very huge argument. There's another consideration which I have not seen much in commentators and theologians, but my thinking has been also affected by 1 Corinthians 11. And it's actually a discussion of the head coverings. Remember, Paul talks about and this order. Infralapsarianism, watch this. In infralapsarianism, in a very real sense, the man is made for the woman and not the woman for the man. Let me repeat that. In infralapsarianism, the man, i.e. Christ, is made for the woman, i.e. the church, because Eve is the picture of the church. She's the mother of all living. And not vice versa as it is in the Bible. And the man is made for the woman only because that woman is foreseen as fallen. So the implication is, had the woman continued well in the garden, abiding by the conditions of the so-called covenant of works, she would have done fine without Christ. This is a logical, very impious, I would admit, implications of infralapsarianism and of this notion of the covenant of works. Because hypothetically, had Adam walked straight, toed the line, he would have translated us all in his loins, both the reprobate and elect, into the higher state of the everlasting life, without Christ, without his cross, by his fleshly obedience. This is the implication of the covenant. Now, I'm not making all the dots necessary in the sense, not every covenant works guy necessarily infralapsarian, and not every infralapsarian is necessarily a covenant works supporter. But there is a connection, usually, and it's been my experience as well, that infralapsarians usually have no trouble with the covenant of works. And it's also been my experience that people who have most trouble with this covenant of works scheme are consistent supralapsarians, to which camp I also, belong, hopefully. I am a supralapsarian. But the only reason is not because Herman Hoeksema or Gordon Clark, not because it's fashionable, it's high Calvinism. I don't care how you term it. The texts are not important. The important point is that the woman was created for man. Christ is first. And remember how Eve was created in the garden. Adam had to be put into sleep. And this is the picture of the sleep of death for Christ himself. He shall see the travail of his soul and be satisfied, because he sees now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She was taken out of man, out of Christ, because the church was made from Christ. But infralapsarians, you have the creation, you have the happy living in the garden, then whoops, you have the fall. Oh, now we gotta appoint a mediator, and we gotta also elect some of those who fell into that common misery. Do you get the point that I'm making? All right. I don't want to be dwelling too much on this, but I guess this is where your lapsarianism has the point of connection to the gospel, in my opinion. And by the way, usually infralapsarians say, well, because we take into consideration the sin, we don't want to make God the author of sin. In infralapsarians, God only permitting the fall, whereas in supralapsarians kind of fixing that, well, it must take place. Look, these are just semantic games. If the highest authority, the highest possible authority in the entire universe, sovereign God and Creator, the all-wise, all-powerful, sovereign ruler, if He permits something to be, it shall come to pass. And His permit is just as good as the decreeing that it should be. I mean, we're just... So, this softness, the apparent softness of infralapsarianism does not help, in my opinion. And that's in Christological supralapsarianism, puts Christ, or rather sees Christ as preeminent, as being first of all, and that we both predestinated in Him, created in Him, fallen in Him, redeemed in Him, and glorified in Him. All things through Him, even our fall. Okay, so that's my point, and that's why I wanted to make this short video, and that's why it does matter which lap Saturn position you take. All right, you think about it and let me know in the comments. God bless you all.